a woman who defied the impossible and saved a nation. How did she do it? And more importantly, how can her courage teach you to transform your life right now? Stay until the end, because what you're about to discover will inspire you to take action. Esther was a young Jewish woman who lived in a city called Susa in ancient Persia. She had rare and captivating beauty, but her life was not easy. Since childhood, she had lost her parents and grew up under the care of her cousin Mordecai, a wise and God-fearing man. Although Esther was an orphan, Mordecai's kindness made her feel loved and protected. He always guided her with wise counsel, and together, they kept their faith alive, even while living in a foreign land far from their homeland. But Esther's destiny was about to change, and in a way she could never have imagined. The king of Persia, Xerxes, had a wife named Vashti who rebelled against him at a great banquet, refusing to present herself before the guests. Enraged, the king decided to dethrone her and proclaimed that all the young women in the empire should be gathered so that he could choose a new queen. Thus, Esther was taken to the palace, among many other women, to be considered for the role of queen. Imagine the scene. Esther, a young woman who had lost her parents, who had lived through hardships, now being taken before the king. She had no power, no wealth, but Esther's beauty and grace caught everyone's attention. However, there was something more about Esther that was invisible to human eyes. She had an unwavering faith in God, and that made her shine in a unique way. When entering the palace, Esther did not behave like the other women who wanted to show off or try to impress the king with pomp and extravagance. She was modest, calm, and, above all, trusted God to guide her steps. And when she was called to present herself before the king for the first time, something extraordinary happened. Xerxes, the king of Persia, was enchanted by Esther. He chose her not just for her outward beauty, but for what shone in her heart. The young Jewish woman became the queen of Persia, without anyone knowing that she was part of God's chosen people. Esther's life, which once seemed marked by loneliness and sadness, was now transforming into a story of divine providence. God was guiding her to a greater purpose, although she still didn't know what was to come. But something was in motion. God's plan for Esther's life was about to be revealed in a surprising way. Esther became queen, but the Jewish people continued to be treated with contempt and discrimination. Mordecai, her cousin, still lived in the streets of the city, remaining faithful to the Lord. He knew that Esther's life in the palace was not just a privilege, but part of a divine plan that was still unfolding. Esther, like many of us, wasn't born into a privileged situation, but God can raise us up from where we least expect to fulfill His plans. He sees beyond our circumstances and even uses moments of hardship to place us where He wants us to be. Esther wasn't chosen only for her external beauty, but because her heart was aligned with God's purposes. True beauty comes from a humble heart that is willing to trust God, even when we don't understand the path He is leading us on. But Esther's story was just beginning. While she lived in the palace as queen, a dark shadow began to form, threatening not only Esther but her entire people. Esther, now the queen of Persia, lived in a magnificent palace, surrounded by wealth and comforts she could never have imagined during her difficult childhood. However, behind all the luxury, evil was about to raise its head. The most powerful and influential man in the kingdom, after King Xerxes himself, was Haman. He was a high-ranking official, and his ambition made him even more dangerous. Haman had the power to manipulate the king and make everyone bow before him, but there was one thing he could not tolerate: Mordecai, Esther's cousin. Mordecai, a man faithful to God, never bowed before Haman, not out of disrespect, but because he knew that only God deserved worship. Haman, who was used to being revered, was furious when he saw Mordecai defying his authority. The humiliation was too much for him. But it wasn't just that. Haman decided that Mordecai's insult needed to be avenged, and his revenge would be cruel. He became obsessed. It wasn't enough to punish Mordecai. He wanted to destroy all the Jewish people. Using his position in the government, Haman convinced King Xerxes that the Jews were a threat to the empire. He proposed a decree that all Jews should be exterminated, without exception, throughout the Persian Empire. Xerxes, unaware that his own queen was Jewish, signed the decree, giving permission for anyone who wanted to kill a Jew to do so. Esther was completely unaware of what was happening. But when Mordecai learned of the decree, he went to the palace gates, desperate. He dressed in sackcloth and ashes, a way to demonstrate his sorrow and grief, and sent a message to Esther. Mordecai asked Esther to go before the king and plead with him to revoke the order. Esther was stunned to hear about the decree, and a great fear gripped her heart. She knew that if she went before the king without being summoned, she could be sentenced to death, for that was the law. The king could only call whoever he wanted to see. But how could she remain silent in the face of her people's destruction? Esther found herself facing a terrible dilemma. How could she, a mere woman, confront a powerful king and a man as influential as Haman? She knew she couldn't act on her own. She needed divine courage to face the greatest challenge of her life. So Esther did something extraordinary. She asked that all the Jews in Susa fast and pray for her for 3 days while she prepared to approach the king. It was her people's last hope. Esther, the queen, knew that she was in God's hands. She had no control over anything anymore, but the confidence that God had placed her there at the right time strengthened her. At the end of the 3rd day of fasting and prayer, Esther dressed in her finest royal robes and went to the throne room. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew that without God's intervention, there would be no future for her or her people. With a heart full of faith, she took the boldest step of her life. When she entered the room, King Xerxes looked at her. He could have easily ordered her to be taken away, but instead, he extended his golden scepter to her, signaling that she could approach. Esther, with a mixture of relief and fear, touched the tip of the scepter. It was a sign that perhaps she had found favor in the king's eyes. But instead of directly pleading for her people's lives, she did something unusual. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet that she would prepare. Esther, in her wisdom, knew that the right moment to act was more than simply making a direct request. She decided to take a more strategic approach, gaining the king's favor and placing Haman in a position where he couldn't turn back. She trusted that God, once again, was guiding her steps. God always teaches us that timing is as important as the courage to act. Often, we want to solve situations immediately, but there are times when we need to wait for God's timing, trusting that He prepares the ground so we can act wisely. When we trust in God and wait for His timing, victory becomes certain, for He knows what is happening in our hearts and in the circumstances around us. But the game was about to change. Esther's banquet was just beginning, and the pieces of God's grand puzzle were slowly falling into place. The banquet that Esther prepared was a masterstroke. King Xerxes and Haman, who had no idea they were about to experience the most pivotal moment of their lives, sat at the table, unaware of what Esther truly wanted. Esther had planned everything carefully. The meal was filled with Persian delicacies, and the atmosphere was perfect. But what was at stake here was not food or drink. The survival of an entire people hung in the balance. During the banquet, the king, surprised by Esther's demeanor, asked, "Queen Esther, what is your request? What do you desire? Even if it's half of my kingdom, it will be granted to you." But Esther did not make her request immediately. She knew the right moment to reveal the truth had not yet come. Instead, she asked that the king and Haman return the next day for another banquet, where she would reveal what was in her heart. Esther's decision to delay the revelation may seem strange, but there was a reason behind it. She wanted to ensure that the king's heart was open, that Haman would be unprepared, and that God was working in every detail. She trusted in God's timing, even when everything seemed urgent. Haman, on the other hand, was intoxicated by pride and arrogance. He felt invincible, having just been invited to an exclusive banquet, just him, the king, and Queen Esther. But as he left the palace, Haman passed by Mordecai's gate, and once again, Mordecai refused to bow before him. Haman's rage flared up even more, and he returned to his house, burning with fury. Even so, Haman couldn't see that his downfall was about to unfold. Deep in his pride, he believed he had control over everything. He told his wife and friends about the honor he had received, but also lamented that he had not seen Mordecai bow before him. His friends then suggested that he build a gallows to hang Mordecai the following day. In his blind rage, Haman immediately ordered the gallows to be constructed, believing that Mordecai's death would solve all his problems. Meanwhile, King Xerxes, who had been intrigued and impressed by Esther's actions at the banquet, couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, but sleep did not come. His mind was restless, so he asked for the royal chronicles to be brought to him. He wanted to read about the events of the empire, perhaps something to help him relax. To his surprise, the king came across an important record. The story of how Mordecai had saved his life years earlier by exposing a conspiracy against him. Mordecai, the man Haman hated and wanted to destroy, had done something valuable for the king. Xerxes was intrigued. What has been done for Mordecai for this great act? When the officials told him that nothing had been done, the king was concerned and thought, "It's time to honor this man who saved my life." The next day, what seemed to be the end for Mordecai became the beginning of his exaltation. In times of crisis, prudence and strategy are often more powerful than impulsive action. Esther knew how to wait for the right time to act. But Haman, with his excessive pride, failed to realize he was digging his own grave. Pride blinds us and prevents us from seeing reality, while wisdom guides us to make better decisions. Esther was about to take the final step, but God's plan was unfolding gradually. What Haman didn't know was that his pride was about to turn against him. The moment of revealing the secret was near, and Esther knew it was time to trust completely in God. For the battle was being fought, not just in the palace, but in the hearts of men, in the quiet night where God worked while they slept. The following day arrived, and with it, the tension in the palace increased. King Xerxes and Haman returned for the second banquet prepared by Esther, and the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. Esther, with the wisdom gained through her prayers and God's guidance, knew that this was the moment to reveal the truth. As the king asked once again, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" Esther stood up and, with courage, made the request that would change everything. She looked at the king and, with a firm voice, revealed the great threat hanging over her people. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life and the lives of my people be spared. For we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." Esther's words cut through the air, and the room fell into a deep silence. The king, completely bewildered, looked at her, not fully understanding what was happening. He then asked, "Who has done this? Who would dare to do such a thing?" Esther, with a determined gaze, pointed to Haman and said, "The enemy is this man." The king, enraged, immediately rose to his feet. Haman, the man to whom he had given so much power, was now the greatest traitor to his empire. In one moment, reality had reversed. The man who once felt on top of the world was now about to be brought down. Haman tried to defend himself, but he knew it was too late. He threw himself at Esther's feet, begging for his life, but King Xerxes could no longer trust him. The king, who had once considered Haman a friend, now stood before a man without honor, a man who had sought to destroy not only a people but the very essence of justice. With his fury mounting, the king ordered that Haman be taken and hanged on the gallows he himself had built for Mordecai. What seemed like Haman's victory was instantly turned into his humiliation and death. God had turned the tables. Pride and betrayal always come with consequences. Haman was so blinded by power and revenge that he failed to see he was straying far from true justice. God can reverse any situation, no matter how out of control it seems. When we trust in God and act with integrity, He fights our battles and gives us victory. The entire empire was stunned. But what the king didn't know was that his decision to trust Esther and act against Haman would save more than just a people. He was about to do something that would mark the empire's history forever. After Haman's downfall, the empire was in a state of shock. Justice had been served, but the Jewish people were still at risk. Haman's decree, which was about to destroy the Jews, was still in effect. Esther, who had been the key to exposing Haman, now turned her heart toward the salvation of her people. She knew she could not stop there. The victory over Haman did not mean the end of the battle. With renewed courage, Esther stood before King Xerxes and asked for a new favor. The king, now deeply grateful to Esther, said, "Ask for whatever you want, Queen Esther, and it will be given to you." She then fell to her knees before the king, pleading for the life of her people. Esther knew that without the king's intervention, there would be no salvation. The lives of the Jews were still at risk, and she would need more than words. She would need action. King Xerxes, moved by Esther's plea, did not hesitate. He granted her the authority to reverse Haman's decree. Justice was restored, and the Jewish people were protected. A new order was issued, allowing the Jews to defend themselves and fight against any enemies who attacked them. The empire was now in a state of renewal, and the threat that once loomed over the Jews was transformed into a surprising victory. Esther and Mordecai were honored and recognized, but the true triumph was the salvation of a nation. The Jewish people, who had been condemned to destruction, now had the chance to rebuild their lives in safety. King Xerxes himself, touched by Esther's courage and wisdom, found himself carrying out a decree of justice, and the empire prospered. The story of Esther became a legend not only because of her courage, but also because of the clear demonstration that faith, perseverance, and trust in God can transform any situation, no matter how impossible it may seem. And just like Esther, we can be used by God to bring powerful change to the world around us. No matter the situation, God can always turn what seemed like a defeat into a glorious victory. When we show courage and trust in Him, nothing is impossible. Now, I want to hear from you. In what area of your life do you need more courage to trust God and act? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts with us. If you feel this message could inspire someone, share this video with them as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following powerful stories like Esther's and learn more about how to live a life of faith and trust in God. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos, because together, we will continue strengthening our walk in faith. Stay blessed and with the wisdom of the Word.